Thank you for joining our webinar, Achieving Agile Digital Process Transformation. Please remember to submit any questions during the webinar for our Q&A session at the end. With that, I'd like to introduce and thank today's speaker and Director of Sales Engineering at ProcessMaker, Jose Maldonado.
All right, thank you, Matt, for that. And yeah, I'm Jose, and I'm super excited to share with you all some examples of how we can take these concepts of digital transformation and actually apply them into a practical use case. So there's a handful of different things I want to cover, so I'm going to go and jump right in. If you're seeing my screen, you're seeing this is my veggie donuts demo instance, where if you've seen some of my prior demos, you're familiar with this mock company that I use for different examples. So I'm just going to go and log in. And of course, we're presented with ProcessMaker's default homepage, where I can track some of the things that are in progress that I'm interested in seeing. But right now I'm going to skip all this, and I want to go straight into the designer, because I want to go through some stages of putting together a quick example from scratch, and then we can grow from there and see a handful of different things. I'm going to go ahead and switch tabs here, click on the designer tab. This is going to bring me into all the building blocks where we can start putting together our processes. So today's example, let's say that Veggie Donuts wants to have a workflow to streamline their purchase orders. So let's just start from scratch and see what that's going to look like. I'm going to go ahead and start a new process up with a new process button. Let's just call it purchase order approval. And this is going to be a quick PO sample. I'm going to pick here any category. And then if I had a source BPMN file that we've created with a process map and any external designer or any of our own modelers in other instances or whatever, we can use that as a starting point. But I'm going to start fresh. So let's just go right in. So this is our process modeler. This is where we get to lay out and map out our process, whatever we want that to look like. So let's take a step back and think for a couple of seconds, what would a purchase order approval look like? Let's say on its most basic form. So most of these approval processes always have some sort of the following approach. Someone will make a request and fill out a request form, just contribute some information, and then that's going to flow into some reviewer who'll take a look at it and capture some decision or some action based on that. And we have tons of different building blocks and tools that can help with this task, but let's start from the top. I'm just going to go ahead and map this process right here. So of course we're going to need a start event, and this is just basically going to flag the point where this request can begin. And there are tons of different configuration options that can make this extremely useful. It can be started manually, it can react to other things and listen to events that are happening elsewhere to fire off. Right now, we're just going to go ahead with a very basic start event. And what's interesting about ProcessMaker is, even though it has all these rich features that you can dive into, if you don't want or don't care for unpacking them, just the basics without much configuration, that would work on its own. So it's extremely quick to just get proficient. Okay, so when our process begins, first thing that we want to do is we want to have someone fill out that request form. So I'm just going to add a task here. And this is basically our regular task. You see it's a task 1. And this is going to be, I'm going to rename it, fill out the PO form, right? Or the request form or whatever. And then we're going to add a new task. And this is going to be the reviewer. So this is a similar task, but this is basically review the PO So this is going to look like something like this. So then we can start stringing these together. I start the process, fill out the request form, and this is going to flow into the review form. Now we need to capture a response. Basically, so, actor one is going to ask, hey, can we purchase this item or whatever? And then actor two is going to say, sure, or not really. So that response, that decision, we need to also capture it and then evaluate it. So that's why we're going to use one of the most common VPN controls here, the good old gateway. And gateways are basically ways to determine how to route our processes based on these conditional values. So I'm going to just add our gateway here. And basically, this gateway is going to evaluate, what did the reviewer respond? And this first iteration, let's just make a very quick branch here. So we can have maybe a loop back. The reviewer could say, no, you know what, I'm going to send it back. Maybe we want you to add some additional information or whatnot. So I'm just going to go and add a sequence that comes back here. Now let me just adjust that. We'll look for that. Perfect. And so we can see an option or a sequence flow from our gateway just going back. So that's going to be sort of option one. Option two is, no, you know what, let's just go forward and approve it. Now, a handful of different things can happen, right? We can maybe add another reviewer, or maybe we can then take that information and send it somewhere, maybe tap into some update to some external system or whatnot, send some email notifications. And we have a handful of different things. Some of them we can just create with additional tasks, or we can use some of our pre-packaged connectors and tasks, like create a PDF or send an email or send a Slack message or connect it to an external service like Salesforce or a custom connector or anything of that nature. In this example, why don't we just pick one of these? Let's create a PDF maybe and have a PDF serve as sort of the official confirmation that the PO is going to be processed. Maybe you want to then take this PDF and send it somewhere, send it to finance or procurement department or whatever. But for now, that should be enough. And then we want to just basically end the process. So we want to add an end event, and then let's just connect here our sequences. And this is starting to look like something, right? So the process will start. Someone will fill out the request form that will then route it into the reviewer. And then we have a gateway basically evaluating, what happened, what did the reviewer say? And the options right here are, send it back or send it forward to the PDF and complete. So right off the bat, pretty simple process. As far as the design, we're almost there. Now we need to start configuring each of these elements for it to make sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And just, it's going to go our first round of a PO approval. Now I don't need to name it, but what's interesting is that we can keep different named versions so that we can then on the fly decide which of these versions we want to actually publish as the one that's going to execute when these processes are then automated, when actual workflows happen. So the main building block now that needs to populate these form tasks are the actual forms or screens. What do we need to present and capture from the users that participate? So let's just go in order and start filling in the blanks. So of course, first we need to fill out the purchase order form, and this is asking for a screen. If you notice over here at the right, we get to configure everything for our tasks. Now there's tons of stuff that we can configure, and again, everything is optional. We don't need to necessarily add everything, but it's there in case that we want to use it. All that's really mandatory, and you see it here in red, is the screen, because this is a form task, or it is a screen task. So, which means a screen is going to be displayed when this workflow reaches this task, and so we want to pick a screen from our screen library. So for that, I'm just going to switch here into our screen designer, and let's put together a quick screen. So of course, here we have a listing of all the different screens that are available. And we could of course leverage any of our existing screens, but for this example, since we are starting fresh, I'm just gonna start from scratch. So let's create a new PO request screen, or I'm just gonna call it request the purchase order screen. And we have different screen types. So for now, I'm going to keep the basic form, and this is basically to request a PO. You can add a category. I'm just going to add anything here and save. So now we're presented with our blank canvas of screen design or screen building. And very similar, it's a blank canvas. We have a palette of all these HTML elements that we can use to create our screen. So I'm just going to go start adding some stuff so we could, just add a nice little title here. This is super intuitive. So this is our purchase order request form, and we can customize this as wanted. So I'm just going to center it. Let's maybe add some styling to it real quick, maybe some coloring. That's fine. And let's just, please the following information. Okay. So then we're going to add some actual fields that we want to capture, right? So I'm going to add, and let's just keep it simple for time's sake. So I'm just going to add a couple of line inputs. So first we want to ask for an item, which is, what do you want to purchase? And then a label, which is what you want to read on the actual form. And we can customize, again, as everything, we can customize deeply as we want. We can keep it simple. And then maybe for this quick example, we also want an amount, which is basically, how much is that going to cost? Some amount, and, we can customize it with a currency data type, which will help maybe with the rendering or the math or whatever, and whatnot. Also, maybe we want to make this particular field, we want to make it required, because, we shouldn't be able to submit a purchase order without a dollar amount. So I'm going to just add a validation rule. And there are tons of different rules that we can use to enforce that, they comply with some standards, that they meet some criteria. Right now, I'm going to keep it super simple and just add it required, meaning, at the very least, just make the amount a necessary part of all our forms. Let's just add a text area. Maybe you want a description of what this is all about. So I'm just going to call it details. Maybe, additional details. This is the label, so what I wanted to read. And, it's a rich text. So let's add some rich text options so that the requester can add some rich data and maybe add some 4 rows to it. Okay, so now we could start previewing what our form is going to look like. So I click on the preview button, and now we can see what this is going to actually render when a workflow is at this task. So yeah, we see it starting to look good. We've got our purchase order request form asking for an item, an amount, and details. Now notice that as I test it here and I start punching in stuff, I also get a preview of what the data is going to look like. So this is a quick way to us just ensure that everything is sort of behaving as expected. We can add more details here. So it's pretty interesting. Now, all that's missing on this form is basically a submit button, because this is a form. So we need to just have a button that says, okay, we're done, move forward. So we have here the element submit button. I'm just going to drag that into our design and configure it. So let's just call it submit. And that's pretty much done. Now we can test it. Notice that it's also the validation is kicking in. So it's looking great. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And like everything, we can keep different versions for this if we wanted to have different alternatives and maybe do some A/B testing and whatnot. All right, so we've got a great request purchase order form. So that's going to sort of fuel our task A. here. And then we need a similar one for the reviewer. And actually we can do it, it's going to be an identical form. We just need a couple of changes. Basically to have it read only, because we don't want the reviewer to modify the data. And we want to add some basically approve reject buttons. So we can make those changes real quick. So since we're based off the same screen, what I'm going to do is, let me just filter here my latest modified, and here we have a request purchase order that just went. I'm just going to clone this one and call it request purchase order review. And this is going to be the review form. So let me go ahead and save that. And now we can open the review form. And yeah, it's pretty much the same thing that we just saw. So now I'm going to make a few quick edits. First, I'm going to select these fields and set them as read-only. Both the item, the amount, the details, right? So now I can't actually interact. And then we just need a couple of approve reject buttons. So we already have one nice button here. I'm going to sort of refurbish that one. I'm just going to add a second one. And since I want them sort of on the same line, I'm going to add a multi-column table, and then we can add them here. So now we have two buttons, and I just want to configure them. So this one I'm going to call reject. That's the label. Notice that's what's going to read here on my button, reject. And then I'm just going to capture a variable that's going to help me to route the process based on the gateway that we know it's coming, based on our design that we did a few minutes ago. So I'm going to call this variable approval, and I'm going to set a value to it that is reject. So that's the value that our approval is going to take if this is the button that's clicked. Other than that, let me just change the design. We can apply different sort of styling variants to it. So over here we have a nice little red danger coloring, and I think it's appropriate for our reject button. And then our submit button, I'm actually going to rename to approve. It's the same variable, so I'm just going to have that approval, but the value is going to be approve. So if you notice here the variable name as I switch between buttons, it's the same variable, and all I'm doing is changing the value depending on which of these I choose to click to submit the button. So now if we take a look at our form in preview mode, notice that I can't interact with this information because it's read-only, but I can certainly just click these buttons and you can see what that data preview is going to look like. All right, so it looks like it's behaving as expected. Let me go ahead and save this. We don't need to create versions for that. And so now we have the building blocks for the fill out and the review, the PO form. So we can start adding that. So here I'm just going to add our screen. So request purchase order. So we have tons of screens. I'm just going to start here, request purchase. And here are the two screens that we just created. So the first one is the request screen. And the second one, I'm going to click it here. I clicked here somewhere. Request purchase order review. So we have the request purchase order submission, the request form, and the review form. Perfect. So now what we need to do is analyze the gateway, basically analyze what happened here on the review. So I'm just going to name this gateway just for design purposes with something that makes better sense. I'm just going to ask, hey, was this approved? And then what we need to do is just configure the outgoing sequence flows or arrows out of this gateway. So this is the one that's going back, right? So we're going to call it here something like no send back. So you could see that's what's going to start looking like in our design. So it's pretty straightforward. And then we add an expression. Now this expression is basically what variable are we evaluating? So remember we had an approval variable. This is what our buttons are defining. And one of those values is reject. Perfect. So I'm just going to go copy this expression because we're going to use the same expression on the other sequence, except we change this reject to approve. correct. And we just name it. So something like yes, yes. Perfect. So now it starts to make perfect sense, right? Fill out the PO form, review it. Was it approved? Yes. Generate the PDF. No. Send it back. So this is starting to have some consistency. It's starting to feel complete. All that we're missing now is a PDF. And this is exactly the same thing, right? Create a screen, pick a screen, which is basically use our own screen builder to create whatever layout or template we want to use. So let's just do that right now. I'm going to switch here to our screen mode. Now for this one, I'm just going to start do from scratch because you'll want to create, custom or fit for purpose templates for your printing and PDF purposes. So I'm just going to go and create a new screen. I'm going to call it my purchase order PDF confirmation. Okay, and then type is going to be a display because it's not a form. We can't have sort of active fields on our flat displays for PDF output. Okay, add some category here. Never mind this. This is just for sorting and other purposes. Awesome. So now we have similar elements. I'm just going to go ahead and add a few sort of quick. So this is going to be purchase order confirmation. Let's just add something here real quick. And then let's just add some data here, the item. And then we're going to use this nice little mustache convention to fill this template with the information that we know is coming from the forms, right? So we had an item, we had an amount. So I'm just using this double bracket, this mustache convention to highlight those variables. We have the details. Now the details, since there are rich text on its own, I'm going to add them as a separate rich text box. And all we're going to do here is this is going to use the details box. Awesome. And we're under as HTML, so it sort of looks nice. And we could keep adding to this, but I think this is pretty self-explanatory as is. Maybe just add some, nice little. All right. So this makes perfect sense. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then purchase order PDF. We come to our, and here, purchase order, and here is purchase order PDF. All right. So now all our moving parts have the internal pieces needed to work. All I want to add is at the end event, we can add a summary screen, which is similar to the PDF piece, just something that says, hey, this happened or whatever. I already have here a screen that says that finishes on success. Or, we could use the same purchase order PDF confirmation. So I'm just going to add any of these. All right. So all the building blocks are there. Let's go ahead and save this process one more time. And let's take it for a spin. So let's leave this design here. I'm just going to I'm going to open a new tab here with our requests. So here's back here. So we're back in our cockpit, track everything that we're monitoring and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and click on new request button, and all the different processes that are available for me are going to appear. So, remember we just created a process called purchase order approval. So even though we can probably see it down there, we can also sort of zoom down. So if I filter, and yeah, it's right here, our purchase order approval. So I'm going to go ahead and start that off and see what that's going to look like. So of course, the workflow execution, what it's going to do is just drive us through that flow that we put together, right? So you remember our first task is to fill out the PO form. So sure enough, here's the form just as we created it, right? Add an item, add an amount, and add some additional details. So I'm just going to go ahead. So, you know, we're in veggie donuts. Let's say that we want to add some, get some vegetables for our donuts. So let's say that we need some tomatoes. And we need, I don't know, $2,000 worth of tomatoes. And, you know, tomatoes are pretty cool. And this is a rich text box, so we can just start laying out why they're pretty cool. Or rather, not like that, but why are they pretty cool? Of course, they're red, which is critical, right? They taste good. And just one more. Sorry, there was just one more. People love them in our donuts for some reason. All right. So we added our details, our information. I'm going to go ahead and submit this. So now that I submit this, right, the next task is to review that PO form. And actually, you notice how my next task in line is to review the PO form. Similarly, if I just went to our request and wanted to see what's going on, notice that the purchase order approval is in progress, that we just fired off. It's the last one here. And the next task in line is to review that PO form. So let's just check that out. So you remember it's the same form, but on read-only format, right? So here, you know, we can't edit this. And we have two options, right? We can send it back with the rejection or send it forward with the approval. You can see the comments. So let's just, you know, test that it works. Let's just go back and see what the rejection looks like. So now that I send it back, notice that the task that we have here pending is to fill out that PO form again. Of course, I just send it back. So let's just try again. But, you know, okay, maybe 2,000 was too much. That's 1,200, okay? And, you know, and they are inexpensive. Submit. Okay, so let's see if this one our manager does find in its heart. So here we have review the PO form, and yeah, we can see the changes, 1,200, they're inexpensive. So, okay, let's go ahead and approve that. So now that I approve this, notice that, you know, we don't have that over here. If I go back to the requests to see what happened, it's no longer in here. We can go to the completed tasks, and yeah, sure enough, it's the last one that we've completed. And if we visit it, we can see that the purchase order confirmation is done. This is our sort of that final PDF format that we put in. You know, we can track everything that happened. We can track how the different gateways happen. We have full audit log capabilities, whatnot. And over here, of course, in the files, we can see that purchase order confirmation PDF. So let me just take a quick look at that. And yeah, pretty much this is the PDF template that we put together. So pretty simple. Why don't we just go back and add one quick edit to this process? You don't have to run through the entire thing, but let's add one layer of complexity. What would happen if you wanted to just have some preset routing before it went to the reviewer? So let's say that we wanted to, I don't know, auto approve it to a certain amount and only escalate to the reviewer if it exceeded that amount. So no problem, it just means that we have another sort of evaluation gateway. So let's just add a new gateway here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and push this down a little so we can make some room for this. And perfect. And so what we want to do is basically this connector here. Now we're going to send it to a gateway. And this gateway is basically going to also just ask a question. So let's say that, you know, we want to auto approve all requests that are under 2,000 and escalate to the reviewer those requests that exceed 2,000. So how would we go about that? So super simple. So first, we need, as always, we need a number of outgoing sequences from this gateway. So I'm just going to go and add a new sequence. And of course, we could make a fully dedicated path, but for time purposes, I'm just going to connect it straight into the PDF, which is basically sort of an approval as is. And we're going to add another one in that goes into the reviewer, right? So here what's happening is, this one is asking, what are we evaluating? So here we're evaluating the amount, right? So we can ask, hey, what is the amount under 2K, for instance? So if the amount is under 2K, what we want to know, or the reason we want to know, is because we want to see if we can take care of it on our own. So if yes, let's just say, yeah, the amount is, so we can auto approve, right? This means that we need to evaluate an expression. So what needs to happen for this route to take place? Well, basically, we already know that we have a variable called amount, and we just ask, so is amount under 2,000? So if amount is under 2,000, yeah, auto approve. So conversely, over here, we're just have the other. Okay, so no, it's not. So escalate to the reviewer, right? So here we can see now, let me just make it a little clearer. There we go. Something like this, perfect. And of course, for that to happen, then we need the expression, amount needs to be over or equal to 2,000. Okay, so this hopefully also makes sense, right? So we fill out the PO form, and then we're asking, what happened to that amount? Is it above 2K? Yes, great, then straight to the PDF. Or nope, then we need a human to actually take a look at this and then review it and follow the gist. So this we sort of understand, meaning it just takes flight similarly to what we just saw. So let's go ahead and save this, okay? And now it does make sense for us to sort of do a new version. So I'm going to just call this version include the auto approval. And this is for requests under 2,000. So what will this do? By naming this version, it allows us to create different branches of this process so that we can also on the fly then further down the road, we decide, hey, do we want to enable this rule or not? So it's not necessarily just replacing what we had. It's just creating a new version of it. We can, on the fly, as we see fit, decide which of these is going to be the actual executable version, or the one that's quote unquote published, the one that will actually take place. And we can keep working on the rest in the meantime, or save them for different tests. So since I just saved that version, that's the one that's going to pick up. Why don't we take it for a spin? We don't have to go through the entire thing, but at least do some quick fillings and see what that looks like. So let me just come back here and, let's try it again. So purchase, and here's our purchase order approval. By now we sort of understand. It's pretty straightforward. Fill out the PO form. So now I'm just going to go ahead and ask for our tomatoes, but this time we want, so let's just go to 1,200. No, well, that's the same example. Never mind. 1,500, and we already know. We already know this. So I'm going to submit. So what this should happen is, since it's 1,500, it should go straight into the PDF generation. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. The task is completed, and notice I don't have that task. Now I could also add some notifications to make it more obvious, and we'll see it in a few minutes, a couple of additional examples of how we can be better monitor what's going on. But since I just started from scratch, I can see at least it's not in my tasks. So let's just take a quick look at our requests and see if it's completed. And yep, here we have our new completed one. Let's check what that looks like. And here it is, 1,500 item tomatoes. It went straight into the confirmation. Notice how we see the gateway, how it routed. we've got our purchase order compilation. So let's try it one more time just to make sure that the other possible choice is also functional. So here we're also going to ask for those tomatoes, but I'm just going to ask $2,200 worth of tomatoes. So more tomatoes. So this way, we should see it in our to-do task, that follow-up task to review it. So I click on submit and it's completed, and yep, sure enough, we captured the review. So 184 purchase order. So quick example, and this of course it follows the logic. So we saw pretty quickly how we were able to, from scratch in a matter of 15 minutes, put together a complete example of just asking for something and having someone review it and approve it. Now, granted, it's a very basic example, but from here we can start building and adding layers to it. So now I want to actually switch into showing you a fully fledged example where we're leveraging a few other bells and whistles in our platform, so you can get an idea of what else you could do with this sort of approach. So another example of process that has a lot to do with these purchase orders is actually our vendor onboarding. So let's say we want to buy those tomatoes or whatever we are purchasing from a vendor. So we want to add a selection on our form that says, who are we buying this from? So normally our customers will have some sort of a vendor collection or a source of a vendor list of pre-approved providers and suppliers. So we have a separate process that I'm going to show to you right now. That is a vendor onboarding. So this is the process that would be followed whenever we want to bring in a new supplier that will then be able to be part of our purchase orders. So I just opened that design, and you'll notice right off the bat, of course, it's a little more comprehensive, but it's, once you take a closer look, it's just as easy to follow than the one that we just saw. So in this example, again, a requester will fill out a request form saying, hey, we want to buy stuff from this vendor. And that's going to go into the flow, which is basically going to ask the vendor and say, hey, we want you to be our supplier. Can you please fill out this information? The vendor will contribute their information. It's also going to go into a review loop, very similar to what we just saw. So the same sort of concepts are applicable in simple and in rich use cases, right? So a reviewer will check out the information for the vendor, and they can send back a notification and say, hey, we're missing some pieces of information. And that sort of review and collaboration loop will continue until the supplier manager, our internal user, is satisfied with the information provided by the vendor. Now, keep in mind, what's interesting of this approach is that the vendor is not necessarily, or certainly is not, a user of our system. So this is also an example of a collaboration process between an internal user and an external contributor. So this is ideal for when we want to bring information from external sources, external contributors, and we want them to contribute, we want them to participate, all within the whole scope of what we're doing. Once the supply manager is satisfied with that, it also goes into a second level of review, basically a risk assessment. Here we're just running some business rules to ensure that we can actually vouch for this vendor. We're basically analyzing some of the information that they sent and having a risk manager determine whether we can onboard them or not. And if so, then we're firing one of those connectors that we mentioned. In this case, with DocuSign. So we want to send the vendor and our manager a vendor contract or a vendor agreement where they can sign off, and it's part of our documents and whatnot. So that's sort of the idea. Let's just go through it real quick and see what that looks like. Now, what's interesting about this approach is, of course, we have two different two different start events, which is two ways of firing this process. So we have a manual start So this is identical to what we just saw. That means, you know, if we went to our start request button, we could, you know, search for vendor onboarding, and yeah, there it is, our vendor onboarding. But we also notice we have a web entry started, and what this does, it publishes the form on a self-standing link that allows us to then embed that link, that page, in any external website or portal or wherever we want to have our requesters access and fire this off, not necessarily just manually from within our own application. So to highlight this, let me just close some of these tasks that I have open here. To highlight this, I have this mock website for our Veggie Donuts corporate employee site. So this is an intranet page. This would be something that you could find, you know, in your SharePoint site or on your Google pages or on any sort of portal application, your CMS or wherever that you want your employees to have access to these processes, right? So there's tons of information here. This is just a mock website, but I want to draw your attention to our quick access workflow. So these are all different things that our employees could be able to fire off. So case in point, we have a new vendor onboarding. So let's just go ahead and click on that. Let me get these instructions out of the way. And you'll notice this is just another of those ProcessMaker forms, just like what we saw a few minutes ago. It's just embedded and surrounded by this website, and it's all driven through that. Let me just see if I still have it here, through this web entry start. So by filling this out, it's going to kick the process forward. So let's see what this process looks through its different stages, and we can you know, wrap it up. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to be quick. Never mind the actual information that I'm filling up. But let's say that, you know, we want to start buying from a vendor that we're just going to call, I don't know, Anna's Bananas. Well, we want bananas for our veggie donuts, and we don't have that vendor in our supplier list yet. So we want to reach out to Anna's Bananas and have them be a part of it. So let's say the representative is going to be Anna Banana and an email. So I am going to add one of my internal emails so we can get those notifications. And notice how we're also having those validation enforcements that we just saw a few minutes ago. So making sure it's a proper email. So here's my ProcessMaker email, and using this vendor tag so we can keep track of emails sent to Anna Banana. So once I submit this, you know, for the requester's perspective, it's done. It's like saying, hey, you know, reach out and make sure everyone is doing their piece. So now let me come in here into my Gmail account, and you saw I just got an email as my vendor inbox from Veggie Donuts, and says, hey, you know, Anna Banana, we want to have you register as one of our suppliers. So Anna Banana is going to click on this link, and what's interesting is this is a fully individualized, self-standing form only for Anna Banana, who's not our user, and she doesn't have credentials, or they don't have credentials on our system. But it's a great way to just get them to participate and be part of our process. So let's just be real quick. Let's say that she can edit some of this information. So our actual name is, you know, Anna Bananas Inc. You can fill in some information here. Let me just be quick. Let's just add some sort of stuff. And then, you know, let's just say Anna Bananas is in Sunrise, Florida, which I imagine is good banana country. Okay. For time-wise, I don't want to go through the entire thing. Anna Banana, I confirm my email. Notice this is a multi-page form where we can have different pieces of information. So, you know, doing bananas since whatever, 1919, and, you know, bananas and other goodies. And of course, we can have this as extensive or robust as we want it. Maybe you want them to attach some information as part of their requirements, a brochure, some credentials, right? So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and click submit. So now it's going to follow sort of the same approach, right? Someone from our team needs to come in and check that out. So now I'm going to come back into our inbox. And in this example, notice how the manager is notified, right? So the manager received a message that said, hey, vendor Anna Bananas just submitted their registration information for you to review. Now, again, we could have captured this notification via any means, Slack message, WhatsApp, or an SMS message, or one of any service that has the possibility of integrating. We could easily tap into that. So now I'm going to go into my tasks. So since I am a user, I just came in, and these are all my tasks, and you can see here some of our old tests that we were doing just a few minutes ago. But here we have the review vendor info. So let's see what that looks like. And by now we sort of get the idea, right? We can review all the information that Anna Banana has contributed in read-only format. So I go through all the multi-pages. If there were any files, I just download them, check them out. And then, of course, you remember I can kick this back and say, no, we need more information from you. So since we're already nearing like 45 minutes, I want to be quick. So let's just say, it's all looking good. And, all this is complete. So notice we can have some sort of conditional routing options or display options. Since it's complete, I get this approve button, plop in my signature, and hit approve. Once I hit approve, then I'm going to also be presented with the opportunity to do some risk assessment. So that's the next task in line. Notice how we also got a notification here, vendor risk assessment. So it's another way to engage. So let's see what that looks like. Of course, it could be a similar user, another user, etc. Now the risk assessment is, now the risk manager is going to just score the risk rating for this vendor. So of course they'll have the opportunity to revisit all the documentation, the reviewer comments, everything that was provided. But the point is they'll go to a risk review. And here we have a nice little widget that based on different risk factors or domains, it's going to calculate an overall risk level and risk score based on some business rules. So it's pretty simple. Let's say, the reviewer will start deciding for each of these factors or axes, what the result is. So it's going to be an average, very low on this, very low on that. And what's interesting is, of course, all of these options will determine both a risk level and a risk score. And it's just going to drive these criteria. So let's say, we reach a stage where, okay, it's okay to recommend. Maybe we want to gather a last couple of checkboxes. And again, we can send it back, send some comments, but for time's sake, let's just approve the vendor. And so now all the checks are in place, everyone approved, it's off my to-do list. Let's go back to our inbox. And now we got the vendor. So this is Anna Banana. We got a DocuSign prompt for signature. So this is that connector kicking in that was at the last stage of our process, basically allowing us to just get the vendor agreement in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and click sure, I agree. Notice that we have our vendor agreement. We sent some information straight from the system. We can go over all the different pieces and just capture our signature right then and there. And then this document is going to just become part of our profile for that vendor. Last step of the way is that we get the completion confirmation. We get that PDF version, so it's sort of a flat version of that process. And that's pretty much it. So this is another example. Let me just show you that design real quick. It's another example of all the different moving parts that follow the same approach, right? Have people contribute information, have reviewers validate and approve that information, route the workflow based on different criteria, have some of these calculations happen automatically, or have them inform an actual decision maker, and then connect with a host of external sources to leverage this information with additional technology pieces and connectors, like in this example, DocuSign and so on. So that's pretty much it. Let me just pause right there, and I'll gladly, pivot into any Q&As that'll apply.
So let's see here what we have on our section. So I see that there's a handful of different questions, both on the general chat and on the Q&A tab. So I'll try and skim through them on point, but we'll also, of course, we're rearing the end of the hour. We won't be able to get into too much detail for all of them. So regardless, we also invite you to keep reaching out, and you can reach us at marketing@processmaker.com for any additional information that you'd like to follow up on, or stuff that we don't manage to go through right now. So this was of course a very brief overview of all what's possible, and we only scratched the surface of some of the alternatives and deeper divings into what we just discussed. So let me just go through some of these and see what we're looking through. So I'm scrolling here through the chat, and the first question that came in is asking, can we have 3 different outputs from the gateway, from the exclusive gateway? So they give an example, of course, not just accept, reject, but a third option to send back for comments or for corrections, etc. And so the answer is absolutely. You're by no means constrained to just 2 options. You can add 3 or as much as needed. Well, from a technical perspective, certainly, then it's just rather a design choice and a business flow choice of what makes sense in each case and how you manage that. There are different sort of design approaches to keep it clean, but yes, by all means, you can have multiple outflowing options or outputs out of exclusive gateways. Then we have how can we find? Excuse me, I'm jumping here over. Oh, there's another question here. Do the requests have unique URLs so they can add into a portal? Yes, we just saw that. There are multiple ways to take our request launching links, or even the contribution links midway, not just to start a request, but to participate in a request mid through, and publish that so it can be easily embedded or made part of a over 90 customer portal or wherever other host container you'd want for that. Where can we find entered data, a database? So I think there are several questions that relate to the data model underneath ProcessMaker. So for instance, how can we use this data in a reporting platform like Power BI or ClickView? What sort of database sits under ProcessMaker? So there are a handful of data related questions. And the answer is, so the gist of it is everything in terms of data for ProcessMaker at first approach by design is a schemaless JSON data model, meaning that it is free-flowing and unstructured, which allows you to very quickly whip up your processes and your requests without any constraints or rigid constraints of what that data is going to look like. That allows you to be very proficient and creative. Now, technically, underneath, this is part of our cloud infrastructure, so there are cloud conversations of how that data is stored, and we're just using JSON-based storage. as far as accessing that data, everything that we've seen is driven through API calls, RESTful calls. So we have a full layer of getting data in and out via just these API calls through JSON objects. And that can, of course, be used to fuel any external reporting or aggregation platforms like Power BI, ClickView, and others. And of course, we have our own internal dashboarding charting engine that we didn't get a chance to see on this presentation, but there are videos out there, and I invite you to check out on our website, our video section. And also, of course, feel free to make sure to subscribe to our channels for upcoming webinars, and we dive into some of these more specifics. So in terms of this data, I think that there are some related questions down below, but I'll just try to go in order, and we can come back to that. What else do we have here? Someone is asking, yeah, so there are specifics on this, how to access purchase orders through this process. In a different process, sales review all the purchase of last year or tomatoes that were above 40, etc. So this refers to how can we access data, but also filter through it, search through it, and that relates to a fantastic feature that we have that's called advanced search, which allows to the user to very easily browse and filter and sort through this JSON data through just keywords and commands to do exactly that. Let me bring up all these requests that involve only tomatoes, or these requests that involve tomatoes but the request amount is only above 40, and that sort of combination. And these are done through our own internal query language, which is also part of our API, meaning that you can use the same syntax to drive those reports in ClickView or Power BI, or et cetera. And that's a fantastic feature. So also be sure to stay very aware of our upcoming content when we might discuss more deeply about our searching and data filtering capabilities. Oh, and I bring it up also because some of the questions that are down below relate to sort of the structured of that data model. So people are asking about hold on, data dictionaries, and that sort of stuff. So of course, data dictionaries, we do have sort of opt-in data vocabularies where you can define those dictionaries, meaning what those data fields and properties should look like, what data type are there, some properties like length and that sort of stuff. And they are opt-in because they're sort of a layer of structure on top of the unstructured JSON. So it's sort of a mix of both worlds, where the first approach is free and unstructured, which allows for very rapid design. But of course, for scale and consistency and integrity, we do have data definition and property tools in place. We only have a couple more minutes, so there's tons of questions here. I apologize beforehand if we don't have a chance to go through them all. Let me just go here through one more. I'm trying to see if a few of these are related, so if in one blow we can go through several of these. But yeah, so some of these are just asking about some specific considerations of our screen design, like dependent drop-downs. We can do all that sort of stuff. Global variables and values can be defined. Yes, we have environmental values where you can define some global references and use elsewhere. And then as a last question is, how can we reuse some of these elements? And this will relate to those global variables. It will relate to using processes and sub-processes. It will relate to using screens and screen assets. So as a last response, I'm going to say everything that we're building and seeing in ProcessMaker is absolutely reusable, and it becomes an asset in a self-standing library. So you saw in our first example, when we created the purchase order process, we also created some screens. Remember how we created those screens independently, and then we tied them to our process. So nothing is holding us from using those same screens, not just in other processes, but also in other screens. So to build sort of more complex screens. So we have sort of this Lego-like building block approach where you start to create reusable assets, and then you use them to build increasingly complex things and feature-rich things. And this just applies to screens, to forms, to processes in themselves, and then connectors that bring and send information through all sorts of places. I apologize. There's tons of interest here that we don't have time to get into the specifics. But we'd love to follow up on all these conversations. So we'll make sure to take note of everything that's been asked here, to follow up individually with each of you. Be sure to subscribe to all our channels where we'll have upcoming content to unpack each of these concepts individually in their own sessions where they warrant just enough content for that. And similarly, just write us up at marketing@processmaker.com, and we'll happily jump on anything and set individual demonstrations and whatnot, evaluate your use cases, and have discussions of how we can apply these concepts in your own corporate needs. So thanks everyone for joining, and please stay tuned for additional content.